All right. Hello and welcome to Kubernetes New Contributor Orientation. This is the second session of our new initiative. So thank you for being part of the early days of this initiative. Um, I need to update my notes. As this meeting series is a new concept, we are still adjusting the content and we may adjust things as we go. So we appreciate you being here in the early days as we start to figure things out. Now, before we start off, we have a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this meeting is recorded and will be published on YouTube. There is a link to the YouTube playlist in the meeting invite if you ever want to find the recordings. All meetings in the Kubernetes community abide by a code of conduct, which you can find the link for at the bottom of this slide. It basically sums up to please be respectful of the speakers and your fellow attendees and generally be excellent to each other. Please use the chat to ask questions and have discussions throughout the call. There will be a Q&A section at the end where we encourage you to ask questions verbally if you're comfortable doing so. A copy of these slides will be available on GitHub. We'll need to get that up hopefully later today, US time. So I'll let you all know in the new contributor channel in Slack if you're in there when the slides are available on GitHub. And when they are available on GitHub, note that they are provided as a PDF file. And if you open that PDF file in GitHub, the links won't be clickable. But if you download the PDF file, then the links are clickable in case you wanted to check out any of the links in this presentation, because there are a lot of them. The purpose of this meeting is to orient you in the Kubernetes community. That means giving you a sense for how the community works and what your part is or could be within it. We'll start off with a presentation to convey information about the community, and then we'll have a Q&A section where you're welcome to ask any question you would like of your host today. Oh, I forgot to switch the slides to have me as the presenter. So I'm going to change that real quick. Uh, Did I stop sharing my screen? I think I did. Uh, Sorry for the delay. Yes. So, hello. I'm Caslin Fields. Your hosts in this meeting are folks who are already contributing to the Kubernetes community, and we're excited to help you get started. I'm going to be giving the main presentation today, and I am a co-chair of the Special Interest Group for Contributor Experience, and you'll learn more about what SIGs are here in a little bit. I'm also a co-lead of the COM subproject and a CNCF ambassador, and you'll learn more about what all of those things mean today. I know that we also have Chris Short on today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chris, as another host?
I certainly can. I am Chris Short. I know my video's not working, sorry. I am also the other co-lead of the comms subproject here in Kubernetes land, and I've been a contributor for a number of years now, so happy to see you all here. And
I
Ray
do see
is
at least
on.
a couple. Yep, I see at least a couple more active folks on if you would like to
Yeah.
introduce yourselves as additional hosts.
I'll go. My name is Ray. I'm a SIGDocs co-chair and also SIG security subproject lead as well. And I'd like to welcome all the new contributors on the call.
Thank you so much for being here. And I'll open the opportunity if there are any other active contributors on. I see at least a couple more. If you would like to introduce yourself, totally optional. You're welcome to do so now. And I'll leave that open for a second.
Yeah. Hey, folks. My name is Sriram. I've been part of the community for like almost 2 years now, I think. I do a bunch of things in securities and contributes here. Yeah, glad to meet you all. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll go ahead and dive into the content. The Kubernetes community is a very big group of people who work together to create and maintain the Kubernetes project. Here are some numbers to give you a sense for just how big the Kubernetes community is. We track data about our contributors via GitHub and a few other contributor tools, and we collect them in a tool called DevStats. This is basically a big database of information about Kubernetes contributions, and you're welcome to explore it yourself. If you just look up Kubernetes dev stats, you'll probably find it. These stats were pulled in March of 2024. I really probably ought to pull them again. But at that time, we had over 86,000 contributors who had made over 4 million contributions. And all those contributions are reviewed by just 6,500 people with reviewer privileges. We'll talk more about what a contribution might mean and who a reviewer might be a little bit later in this presentation. Here's another visualization of how large our community is and how fast it's grown. This graph from the 2023 Kubernetes Project Journey Report shows how we've grown from Kubernetes beginnings in 2014 to today. We grew from 0 to over 80,000 contributors in our first 10 years. Now, before we dive deeper into the community, some of you may be unfamiliar with what Kubernetes is and what it does. So, Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration tool. Open source means that it's made by people around the world, some of whom are paid to work on it, but many of whom are volunteers. And the code of the Kubernetes software is publicly available under an open source license that describes exactly who, when, and how the software and its source code can be used. And the cool thing that Kubernetes does is orchestrate containers. Let's go over what that means. So businesses have many applications that they need to run. For example, they might have a payroll application, logistics applications, or a company website. These applications need to run somewhere. So businesses also have a lot of computers to run these applications on. Kubernetes enables businesses to say, hey, Kubernetes, here's the computers I have, and here's the app that I need to run. You can describe various levels of detail about how that application needs to run or the hardware that it might need, and Kubernetes will run it on a machine for you. It also provides some handy functionality for managing the application while it's running. For example, it can provide some help for the process of updating the application to a new version. Exactly how it does all of this magic is what Kubernetes contributors work to maintain and improve every day. So let's learn more about how contributors build Kubernetes by exploring our community's structure. Kubernetes is an open source project within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or the CNCF. The CNCF is a nonprofit organization with the stated mission to make cloud native ubiquitous. To that end, they support many open source projects that enable companies to run applications in the cloud. The CNCF provides a variety of guidance and support to its projects, including legal support, codes of conduct, help with logos and copyright, and more. The pyramid below the CNCF represents the structure of the Kubernetes community. At the top, interfacing the most with the CNCF and presiding over various topics that affect the entire community and project, is the steering committee. This is a body of 7 members who are elected by Kubernetes org members. We'll go over more about what org membership means shortly. With a project so large, there are many concepts within the project that need unique skills and knowledge. For example, the way that Kubernetes nodes, the computers where workloads run, do what they do is one area of expertise. Meanwhile, the challenge of writing and maintaining the Kubernetes docs needs folks with a different set of expertise and skills. People who work on specific areas of the project gather together in what are called special interest groups, or SIGs. These break up the work of building and maintaining the Kubernetes project into more sensible chunks. Sometimes, however, there are big areas that need attention that are both very significant and cut across SIGs. Sometimes these are split out into what we call working groups. A working group is generally temporary, created to address a specific issue and then meant to disappear as a focus group once that topic is sufficiently addressed by ongoing SIG work. A defining characteristic of working groups is that they generally don't own any code or features, at least not in the long term. Working group work is, or will be, owned by one or more SIGs by the time the working group dissolves. Unless, that is, the working group becomes a SIG, which does happen occasionally. But even the work of one SIG can be quite broad in scope. There can be hundreds of contributors to a single SIG, so SIGs further break down their work into subprojects. Currently, there are 24 special interest groups, 7 working groups, and 3 committees in the Kubernetes community. We can further group SIGs and working groups by their scope. Some groups operate at a project level, and all other work in the project depends on them. Some groups work at the horizontal level, meaning that they have technical focus that is both deep and broad and own core functionality from a project architecture perspective. Vertical groups have deep specific technical focus that depends on the work of the horizontal groups, and of course both horizontal and vertical groups depend on the work of the project groups. So here's a diagram of all the SIGs and working groups currently active in the Kubernetes project. To call out just a few, SIGs Release and Docs are groups whose work you might be familiar with, and they operate at a project scope. Though you may not have known it, you've probably encountered the work of SIG API Machinery and SIG Auth before. We consider these to be horizontal groups. And in the vertical groups, you can also find lots of familiar concepts like autoscaling, scheduling, networking, and node. You might want to refer back to this diagram later as you're exploring groups to contribute to. Feel free to ask questions about these during the Q&A or in the chat now. But for now, we're going to move along and talk more about contribution. Now you've learned the basics of how the community is structured. Let's start exploring where you fit into all of this. First off, let's briefly explore why you might want to contribute. There are many reasons people contribute to the Kubernetes community. For some, their job requires contributing. There are also contributors who work with the community on a purely volunteer basis. There are also those who are somewhere in the middle, where their work needs them to contribute sometimes, but they also do extra work for the community outside of their job, like me. So why do so many people contribute without getting paid? They may want to grow specific skills for their resume, or maybe they want to meet people working in the industry. Maybe they just think the technology is cool and they want to dive deep and help build it. Or sometimes folks just like being part of a community of people that are all working towards similar goals. So you should think carefully about why you want to contribute. As you get more engaged with the community, you'll get more out of it if you can clearly tell people what you want. If others know who you are and what you want and what you can do, they can more easily help you find work, opportunities, and connections that will most benefit you. Regardless of why you're interested in contributing, you're probably wondering what it means to be a contributor. To answer the question of what it means to be a contributor, let's first explore what might count as a contribution. The truth is that any work you do to support the Kubernetes project is a welcome and valued contribution to the community. That sounds broad and vague, but it's important. There's a lot of work contributors do behind the scenes to make this project run, and it's certainly not all writing code and making pull requests on GitHub. That said, it can certainly help to have some examples. Here are a few you might have thought of and maybe some that you hadn't. For example, did you start off by posting a hello message in the Kubernetes new contributors channel in Slack? That's a contribution. Have you commented on an issue or a proposal for a new feature to share your thoughts or opinions? That's a contribution. Even watching or attending this meeting right now is a contribution, so pat yourselves on the back for contributing today. As a community, we try our best to acknowledge and appreciate contributions to the community in many forms. But if so many vague and varied things can count as contribution, then what does it mean to be a contributor? There are varying levels of being a contributor. You might remember our slide earlier where we mentioned contributors and reviewers. This slide delves into more detail on what those terms mean. Starting at the bottom, anyone can be a contributor. If you do any of the things mentioned on the previous slide and more, you're already a contributor. If you contribute to the community in any way, then you might be what we call a non-member contributor. This means that you pop into the community and contribute, likely in small, disconnected ways. But if you really want to get involved with the community, you might want to go for org membership. An org member refers to a member of the Kubernetes organization on GitHub. Being an org member gives you higher privileges to interact with the tools that contributors use to do their work, like our Prowbot in GitHub, which helps us apply labels and configure issues using GitHub comments. Having org members having org membership is a sign that you're active, engaged, and you're contributing in more structured ways within the community. You're not just picking up a single issue or asking a one-off question. You're probably developing expertise in a certain area of the project. You might be contributing to one or more sub-projects or SIGs in consistent, measurable ways. So you'll be ready to become a Kubernetes org member when the contributors that you work with normally are familiar with your work and will vouch for you as sponsors on your request for membership. Beyond becoming an org member, there are increasing levels of trust, ownership, and responsibility that you could choose to pursue. Once you've been engaged in an area for a while, you might have enough knowledge to help review contributions or pull requests from other contributors. Eventually, you might be trusted enough to have the final say on whether some code is merged or a contribution is accepted and displayed on something like the Kubernetes.io website. Then you would be an approver. If you become a strong expert in a specific area who is highly trusted and regarded for your expertise, you might take on new responsibilities. You might become the person that others come to with questions, and you might lead triage sessions for or other types of work for that area. At that point, you might be a sub-project owner. If you're an expert who starts leading things in that area, you might also take on the responsibility for various resources within that area and how they relate to other parts of the project. For example, you might take on responsibility for the README file defining a whole sub-project, which is where people would go to learn about it. And you might become the contact person who triages requests from other parts of the project. At that point, you might be a sub-project lead. If you're leading a whole sub-project, that's a considerable chunk of work within a SIG. You're probably interacting and collaborating with leads of other sub-projects, and you're probably developing a pretty strong sense of the mission, objectives, and ongoing work of the SIG as a whole. At that point, you may become a chair or tech lead for an entire special interest group. If you remember our community structure diagram from earlier, you might wonder if becoming a steering committee member would be the next step. But steering is an elected position. You can actually run for steering at any point in this diagram, but you're more likely to get elected the better other contributors know your work. The latter might seem like the one true path to contribution, but I want to remind you that there is no single path for your contributor journey. Most contributors end up contributing in multiple areas of the project. Some people even develop ownership in different SIGs at the same time. Just because you're learning and contributing in one SIG doesn't mean you can't check out a different one. Remember that most contributors are at least partially volunteers. Almost everyone contributing is doing it because they love it. So look around, find what you love, and just do that. Now you know the basics of how the community is structured and how you might fit into it. As we've established, you might already be a non-member contributor, but if you want to do more to contribute, let's explore where you can start. The fastest way to learn and make yourself useful will be to find a SIG that suits your interests and just start getting involved there. That might not mean immediately picking up an issue and writing code. Often, getting involved means attending meetings, reading notes and existing issues, and just generally starting to get a feel for what the group does. Yes. I wanted to call out on this slide a couple of different ways that you can find the community and see what they're talking about, and kind of follow along with what's going on. So one is Kubernetes Slack. If you haven't joined it yet, slack.k8s.io is how you get an invite to join. That is where the community does a lot of their asynchronous work. And basically, all of the SIGs and working groups have channels within that Slack, so definitely join that. There's also the Kubernetes Developer Google group, which we also call KDev. So that's the primary mailing list that we use for announcements in the Kubernetes community. So sign up for those emails if you want to get more deeply involved. I'll mention that again later too. So let's explore more about how you can learn about a SIG so that you can find groups that are doing work relevant to your interests. So where can you start learning? First, check out the Kubernetes Community repo on GitHub. We also often refer to GitHub repos using k/the repo because Kubernetes is made up of a whole lot of different repos. So check out K-Community. In K-Community, you can find folders containing information about each SIG and working group. Then, when you click on a SIG's folder in the community repo, it'll show you that folder's README. At the top of that file, you'll find a brief summary of that SIG's focus area, and likely a link to more detailed information in their team charter. That'll give you a broad, high-level understanding of what the SIG does. Below the summary of the group, you'll find information about when the group meets. And attending meetings is often a way to learn more about who is doing the work in that group and what they're currently working on and how they do that work. So, attending meetings is a great way to start getting to know the group of people that you're interested in working with and for them to get to know you. You'll also find information about the SIG's leadership. Most SIGs have both a concept of chairs and technical leads. These leaders are at the same level of trust and responsibility, but likely own different types of tasks for supporting the SIG. Chairs tend to do more project management type work for the SIG, while tech leads tend to do more architectural leadership, like managing repos and certain kinds of technical decisions and processes. Each SIG defines what those roles mean to them, and each leader will be a little bit different. You'll also find contact information for that SIG. Most SIGs in Kubernetes do a lot of asynchronous communication in their channel on the Kubernetes Slack, which you can visit again by by visiting slack.k8s.io, where you'll get an invite to join. Each SIG also has a mailing list. Important announcements for all contributors for that SIG will go out on that SIG's mailing list. So the mailing list will also be invited to all the SIG meetings via Google Calendar. So if you want to get more involved with a SIG, joining the mailing list is a great way to do that. You'll also find more information about where to find issues and PRs related to that SIG, and information like the GitHub teams that are part of that SIG. And once again, I want to call out that every contributor should join the Kubernetes Dev Google group, also known as KDev. That mailing list is the primary communication channel for important contributor information. So if you're getting involved with the community, you'll need to join it at some point. Checking out each SIG's folder will show you lots of information about that specific SIG. But what if you want to find information about all of the SIGs, not just one? Or all of the SIG meetings at least. The community maintains a contributor website at k8s.dev, little known fact. And within k8s.dev, we have a page that has information about all of the public community meetings. So you can go to k8s.dev/calendar to see a list of all of the meetings. Clicking on one will bring up a new window for you to add the meeting to your own calendar. That can be a great way to get a sense for which groups meet at times that might work for you, because time zones are always a challenge. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it is very, very helpful. So now you know how the community is structured, where you might fit in, and how to start learning more. You might also want to know if there's any actively open work that you could pick up and become a part of. We reach out to the SIG leads each month to ask them to share any current opportunities that they would like you, prospective contributors, to know about. And I haven't actually reviewed it myself, so let's find out together if there's anything new. On this slide, you can see Evergreen opportunities. So these are opportunities for work that are basically always available or which are available on a regular cadence. So here we call out note-taking. Most SIGs have meetings and they try to record notes for those meetings. So if anyone misses the meeting and wants to know what was discussed and they don't want to watch the recording, which you could also do, then they'll usually try to have notes. And that's usually a volunteer position. Anyone who is in the meeting is welcome to try to take the notes. So highly recommend doing that if you ever attend a meeting. It's really, really appreciated. And it's just the role of the note taker is to follow along with the discussion that's happening in the meeting and just make sure that that's recorded in the notes so that if someone comes along later, they can get a sense for what was talked about. Also in SIG Triex, which is the SIG that I am a co-chair of, we have a couple of Evergreen opportunities. One of them is SIG Spotlight blogs. So in the COM subproject, which Chris and I are co-leads of, we have this Evergreen project where our members interview the leads of various SIGs, and then they write a blog about what they learned from talking to those leaders. So that's basically always available because there are a lot of SIGs in the project. We actually do have an active list of which SIGs have not been claimed so far. So it's a great way to get to know the project better and also to have a very visible contribution. So we always welcome folks who want to work on SIG Spotlight blogs. Another one is the Kubernetes Contributor Summit staff. So we have Kubernetes contributor events aligned with KubeCons generally. So we have them for KubeCon EU, KubeCon North America. KubeCon China usually has its own that's led by contributors. India is going to have something along these lines as well. And so these are events that are largely led by contributors, and they happen twice a year. And there are specific roles and handbooks on how we do the work in those groups. So you would become a shadow for one of those roles, theoretically. So if you're interested in events and that kind of thing, that's always a nice evergreen project for you. And another one is SIG Docs. Ray, since you're on, would you like to talk about it?
Yeah. So SIG Docs, we always have evergreen opportunities. We do welcome new contributors and new reviewers as well, and formal reviews are welcome. We also have a PR Wrangler Shadow program. So PR Wrangler is an approver who reviews PRs for the week, and the Shadow program allows new contributors to shadow them for a week. Not necessarily a one-on-one shadowing; it's more of an asynchronous shadowing. Whenever I am shadowing someone, or whenever I have a shadow, I actually like to do a one-on-one meeting early in the week to review how I review PRs. Then later on, I do like to touch base later on in the week to see how they're doing. So it is. It's some approvers they do it more. They could have a more hands-on approach, and some reviewers have a more asynchronous approach. Okay, and another evergreen opportunity is that we do have a new contributor meet and greet session every month. It's the first Tuesday of the month at 10:30 UTC. And you can find more information on GitHub on Kubernetes/community/SIGDocs. All right, thank you.
And I'm sure we'll have more from SIG Docs a little bit later too. All right, so that's it for evergreen opportunities. Those are great because they represent work that always needs doing and which is likely well defined. But a lot of work is one-off style, an issue that needs fixing or work on a new feature. Many of these types of tasks require specific skills to complete. You might see an open request that requires a skill that you want to develop, and you think, I'll pick up that task as a great way to learn that. But I want to warn you to be wary of doing that. If the task was easy for someone who was already involved with the SIG to do, then it probably wouldn't be an open request. Many requests with skill requirements are open because no one in the community currently has those skills, so they can't teach them, or they may be open because people who do have those skills are too busy and can't pick up more work, including helping others. But if you're coming to Kubernetes with existing skills like certain programming languages or specific technical skills like Linux networking or expertise in a certain cloud provider, these tasks could be a great opportunity for you to contribute to the community using those skills. So, calling out a few here. I should have taken off the new thing, but it is basically still new, so that's fine. Starting out with SIG Triex, one thing that we could really use some help with is website maintenance for kades.dev. It is a Hugo Doxy website, and it has some issues. So we could always use the help of folks who are interested in websites, and especially if you have familiarity with Hugo and Doxy, we could use some help with the kades.dev website maintenance. Chris, do you want to say anything more about that since you're more closely involved with that than I am?
Just that it's if you know if you know anything about static site generators, it's like theme upgrade and static site generator upgrade kind of have to happen in tandem. So any help with that is appreciated.
Another opportunity within SIG Triex is the mentoring program. We do technically have a mentoring subproject within SIG Triex. This technically is part of the mentoring subproject because we want to provide opportunities for folks who are newer to the project and folks who want mentoring to be able to find it as much as we can. So the goal of the mentoring subproject is to help set up, support, and execute the Kubernetes, well, the role of the person who would help with this would be to help set up, support, and execute the Kubernetes group mentoring program. So this is a program within the mentoring subproject where we help to enable different SIGs to set up groups within their SIGs where they do mentoring. Docs, of course, kind of does it on their own, and they're really good at setting up mentoring. But we also have like specific cohorts. For example, we talked about that ladder earlier. If there's a specific role within that ladder that the SIG needs help with, they might pick some candidates kind of from their contributors and start up a little group mentoring program where they're trying to help make sure that those folks develop the skills that they need to reach that level of the contributor ladder or things like that. So this role would need organization skills, planning, communication type skills. You would be helping the community to keep track of the various mentoring programs that we work with as well, things like LFX, Google Summer of Code, and things like that. We need to make sure that the maintainers within Kubernetes know about those programs and that they can submit their work to those so that we can get mentors or get interns through those programs. And familiarity with the Kubernetes community would be helpful. So maybe a little bit later in your journey as you have org membership, this might become more interesting to you. Program management and communication skills are, of course, very important. So if you're interested in this, please do reach out. Even if you're not super familiar with the community yet, we could use some help with the mentoring program. And SIG Docs. Ray, would you like to talk about this one?
Yeah, so we do have a current call for help for more blog reviewers. So if you're not familiar with Kubernetes itself, you're more than welcome to review blogs. We do have a style guide that they should follow, a content guide, and also a submit on how to submit a blog page and a reviewing PR guide. So folks who are new, who are not familiar with maybe Kubernetes documentation stuff, but they can definitely help out with the reviews. And like I said before, informal reviews are welcome.
And very much needed and appreciated. Thank you so much, Ray. And it looks like that's all we've got for this time. At this point, I have built in a time check for myself. We do have 20 minutes left, so I could go over the common contribution pitfall tips But also, if there are any questions at this point about what you've learned so far, would love to know. Leave that open for a second in case anyone has any questions. Oh, a good question for you, Ray. I'll read it aloud. How can I start translating documentation? Many people have difficulty reading the documentation in Brazil because they don't know the language.
Yeah, so we have a localization subproject, and within that subproject, we actually have many localization teams, including a Portuguese Brazilian team as well. There is a Portuguese Brazilian localization of the documentation, and we have a team, and there is also a Slack channel for that group as well. Let me try to look it up. It'll be like localization dash PTBR is the localization code for Brazilian Portuguese. So if you look up that on the Slack channel browse, and you could find their local Slack channel. And I'll put on chat as well how folks can actually help localize Kubernetes. And we actually have we have a blog post, and we actually have a few pages dedicated to that. So I'm going to put that in the chat there. That's the blog post, and also how to localize Kubernetes documentation. And I believe the lead for the Portuguese Brazilian effort is Maureen. So if you reach out to Maureen or reach out on the Slack channel, they could help you out.
Thank you so much for calling that out. Localization is a wonderful place to get involved if you know more than one language. A lot of folks get their start in the community by doing that. So good catch. Any other questions, or would folks like me to dive into the common contribution pitfall tips? All right. I'll go over some common contribution pitfalls then. The first one I want to talk about is a common contribution pitfall that I like to call the good first issue trap. The scenario goes something like this. You're a new prospective contributor and you're excited to make your mark on the community. You find an issue with the good first issue label on GitHub and you think, great, I'll claim this issue, write some code, and I'll have contributed to Kubernetes. Let's back up a step. Once you pick up that good first issue, how are you going to complete it? I mentioned earlier that the Kubernetes community uses tools like our Prow bot to help us manage issues. Are you familiar with that bot? It's fine if you're not. You'll maybe just start writing code. Those reviewers, approvers, and owners we mentioned earlier will hopefully appear to make sure that the issue has the right labels and stuff on it. And once you've written your code, you'll also need to get their attention to review your PR. Remember, there's a lot more contributors than there are reviewers, so that can take a little bit sometimes. When you make your PR, reviewers and approvers will be automatically assigned. But what if there are issues in your code? You might need to go back and forth with the reviewers on GitHub. Are you comfortable using comments and pull requests to see the work through to completion? Most good first issues that get picked up by new non-member contributors never make it to completion. The code never gets checked in. And then the community has all these stale issues and PRs sitting around for work that we really needed done, but the person just got lost along the way and ended up abandoning their contribution halfway through. So then those reviewers, approvers, and owners have to go through the process again of triaging the issue and opening it and whatever else they might have to do with that issue once it's been abandoned. So you can avoid getting stuck in this trap by joining a SIG and just sticking with it. When you know the people that you're working with and the goals that you're working toward, you can be a valuable part of not just doing the work, but making sure that the work gets done. Another contribution pitfall to call out. This was a lot of information today, and this is just the orientation meeting. When you join your first SIG meeting, you're probably going to be overwhelmed. A lot of SIG meetings exist for active existing contributors to collaborate with each other on active in progress work. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't join as a new contributor. You absolutely should. You'll learn faster by joining the meetings and watching the process in action. But it might mean that you feel left out or lost the first few times that you join a meeting. Don't be afraid to ask questions by speaking up, asking in chat, or asking in the SIG or subproject Slack later. The Kubernetes community is a big, diverse place. It's diverse in terms of people, skills, technologies, and so much more. It might take you a while to find the place that clicks for you. There might be a particular SIG or subproject where you find more opportunities to build the skills or connections that are most important to you. Don't forget that you can move around and explore other groups within the project. Most contributors end up contributing to multiple areas, and many find a particular area that they dive deep on. No two contributors have the same journey, so you'll need to explore and find the best places for you. Regardless of which areas you explore, we need your help, and we're glad that you're here. So this was a lot today. That was all I have for tips, except, of course, for the resources. Getting started in the Kubernetes community means learning a lot of tools, processes, structures, and more. So check out these links and refer to them often as you grow. A lot of these links are also in the meeting invite so that you can get to those easily. And as it says on the slide, it's not always easy to get started and it's understandably frustrating, but if you stick around, it's really worth it, we think. So we would love to help you stick around and we hope that you'll join us. And that's all I have. So any questions? Leave it on the resources slide in case anyone has those. Wants those. Any questions about contribution or what you've learned today? Wonderful. Thank you for joining today. So then I'll call out that this meeting is a monthly meeting. We try to hold it at least on a monthly basis. The next one is going to be the week after KubeCon. I think we're going to try to keep it on the schedule, even though the pair of us that have been running this meeting and the corresponding EMEA APAC friendly meeting will be at KubeCon, but we'll try to run this meeting anyway. So it's largely the same content every week or every month, but hopefully the requests, the calls for help will change. We should be getting calls for help for the contributor event that's happening on site at KubeCon. So we should be able to update our slide deck with some of the fresh calls for help from other SIGs from there. So if you want to join in November, I'll have to check when it is in December to see if we're going to hold that one. But the beginning content will be the same. So if you come in halfway through, if you just want to see the calls for help, you're welcome to do that. Thank you for joining. Glad to hear folks learning about SIGs. It's a strange concept. The terminology can be one of the challenging things when you're getting started. Welcome. Thank you for joining. All right. Folks are dropping off. So I suppose we'll see you all on Slack. If you have any questions, I try to be around in the new contributor channel in Slack, and I hope I'll see you around the community. All right, I'm going to stop our recording.